Today, I'd like to continue our discussion of the book Undoing the Knots by Maureen O'Connell. This book deals with racism and how we can address the racism that we find within ourselves, in our society, and in our church. She talks about an author, Joe Fegan, and Joe makes a point about the hidden curriculum of beliefs. And these are beliefs that we have within ourselves that we're just really not aware of, things that we've grown up and that we've sort of absorbed, not really with intention, but things that have kind of crept into our belief system. Joe mentions different images that we have, different emotions, different narratives that have taken place in our lives, and we've absorbed them. These are things that are part of us. And what Joe is referring to here is what we call a white racial frame. This is just what we're used to. It's not that we deliberately set out and say, hey, I want to be a racist. This is the framing I want to have. Things that we have acquired over the years. And so structural racism is something that we're part of, but we're just really not aware of it. We're not attuned to it. It's not something that we're going to give any attention to. It's not something we're going to bother with because it seems kind of vague to us. What is structural racism? I've grown up. I've grown up in a family. I've grown up in a community. I'm used to a certain way of acting and being. This is how I am, and I'm a good person. I don't try to harm anybody. So I'm just not aware of any sort of racism that I'm involved with at all. And so when someone says you're a racist, we're like, oh no, not me. I'm not, nothing to do with me. She talks about different evolving traditions. And so the tradition that she wants to examine in this particular book is how can I become really an anti-racist? So how can I take a stand really against racism? It's difficult because I've absorbed all of this hidden curriculum that she's mentioned. But what can I do to be more attuned to the racist aspects in our society, and how can I unpack them? How can I get rid of them, deal with them in a constructive way? She mentions an author, James Keenan, a Jesuit priest, and she says that really the key, she thinks, to unpacking racism within ourselves is what Keenan speaks about as mercy. And he has an interesting definition of mercy that she is going to use in her journey here. And that is, mercy is the willingness to enter into the chaos of another. So mercy is when I say, yeah, I think I will enter into this chaotic situation. And most of us naturally are going to resist entering into the chaos of anybody. That's not what we're attuned to. But to really be a merciful person is to enter into their situation and to try to see things from their perspective, which again is difficult. It's not going to be easy for us because we're used to a certain way of being, we're used to a certain way of acting, and to enter into chaos, most of us, don't want to go near chaos. And so to enter into that, it's going to be difficult for us. It's going to be a stretch for us. But she says it's really helpful. It's fruitful when you're dealing with a topic like racism. Uh, the contention of Keenan, and one that Maureen absorbs as well, is that racial mercy ought to define Catholicism for the white American Catholic. So this idea of racial mercy is an idea that we as Catholics should accept, should be aware of, and should be willing to enter into, because it really should define what Catholicism is for us as white Catholics. Uh, and again, this is something we look at and say, well, what do you mean here? That I have to have this type of mercy. as a white Catholic. I just want to go to church. I want to worship God. I want to receive the Eucharist. I don't want to enter into any of this. And you can understand that mentality. I mean, why would we want to enter into something that might be a stretch for us, difficult for us, something we're not used to, something that's part of this hidden curriculum that we're not even aware of? It's going to be something that's certainly going to be a challenge for us. And she quotes, in terms of this challenge, she quotes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who says, justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. So justice is love. It's based in love, love for another. We want justice because we love that person. We want to make sure they have equal opportunities and fairness. That's very important for us. But it's correcting that which revolts against love. So we first have to acknowledge that there are things in us that revolt against love, where we say, I'm not going to love this person. I'm not going to enter into their reality. I'm comfortable where I'm at. Things are good here. And so to have that sense of trying to enter into another person's situation, see things from their perspective, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be more loving. It's a challenge to expand our concept of love. And that's always difficult for us as human beings. We have a certain way of acting, a certain way of being, and now we're called to love even more. We're like, hey, I got enough on my plate without, loving anymore. But the challenge of Dr. King, this idea of correcting that which revolts against love, is really one of the keys to establishing this type of mercy that Maureen is advocating for in her book. Very helpful in doing this is a process she calls rounding. And rounding is going to be the key to what she goes through in her own process of addressing racism. And rounding is really based on an Irish tradition that takes place after we confess. So confession is the first element. And so we acknowledge, I've done something wrong. I haven't done what I should be doing. We have that tradition, the sins of commission, but then the sins of omission. And so after that confession, we go to a sacred site, a sacred spot. And on that sacred spot, they would place a stone after each round. And the idea of going in the round, going around the sacred spot. And then we place the stone symbolizing the fault, what we have done or not done. It can also be done sometimes with buttons, she says, threads, pieces of fabric. And sometimes even in the Irish setting, you go and you see some of these places where the rounding has taken place. So rounding can be a very helpful process and can help the knots of sin to become undone. So as we go through this process of dealing with Maureen's racism and reflecting on our own racism, we're going to do it in this fashion called rounding.